Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever the hell this reaches you. This is Kevin Lewis from the Middle Initial Podcast. It's the most wonderful time of year. It's time for fantasy football drafts. It's time for training camp. You name it. Um, I'm going to do a series on here where I do just general musings about the positions, like quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, sleepers, breakouts, bust, or whatever commentary that comes that comes to my mind. And I'm here to help you win your fantasy leagues. Hopefully, not ones that I'm participating in, but that's neither here nor there. So today we're gonna do a quarterback preview. This probably will be the shortest of them because I feel like quarterback is the easiest position to deal with. Um, I don't know. I guess most commoners, most like people who aren't degenerates like me, basically, are playing in one quarterback leagues at this point. So I guess I will just mostly talk about them. But for those who are in Superflex, like I will begin the show talking about that. Usually in one quarterback leagues, I'm the last person to take a quarterback, or just about the last person. Like there are exceptions, but normally I'm the last or near last person to take a quarterback in a one quarterback format. That's what I would strongly suggest it, unless like some crazy value falls in your lap. Like we'll touch on Dak Prescott in a little bit, but like somebody like that falling to round 7, 8, you want to take that person and be the sixth person to take a quarterback instead. That makes perfect sense. But to Superflex, obviously the math changes, the calculus changes, and thus the strategy also should change. Like you're playing two quarterbacks at that point. So obviously you got to take one earlier. Well, you don't have to, but I would strongly suggest it. And I would suggest, while I am very running quarterback heavy as far as one quarterback leagues go, I would suggest your quarterback one just be a really good quarterback. It does not matter what they do. Now, most of the people at the top of the list run. Mahomes, Josh, Lamar, Hurts. There are a few guys who I think could be there who also run. Even Joe Burrow provides a little bit, not too much on the ground, but something. Kyler Murray is, in that next tier, let's say near the back end of the top 10. He provides something on the ground. So a lot of people at the top provide something on the ground anyway, but I would be less selective about who my quarterback one is and simply just draft whoever is at the top of the board. Whereas with one quarterback league, you could be a little bit more selective. Now, with Superflex, I think the ideal pairing is somebody like, you can take two quarterbacks in your first two picks. That depends on your level of comfort. I wouldn't really advise it or against it personally. That depends on your level of comfort, how many teams are in your league, who you're drafting with, how well you know them, blah blah. It depends on a lot of things. But my ideal setup for me personally would be a top end quarterback. You name them: Josh, Patrick, Jalen, Lamar. Yeah, one of them, and like a Jared Goff in round 3 or 4. That would be my ideal setup. Thus, you get your wide receivers, tight ends, whoever the hell else in between, and you draft, a top end guy, obviously with massive upside, and you draft Jared Goff, who Jared Goff is pretty much the only. I guess Dak Prescott's a pocket-based quarterback, but he still provides something on the ground. But Jared Goff is like the only quarterback that provides nothing on the ground that I'm actually really interested in this year, because the Lions play, I want to say it was 15 games indoors or 14 games indoors, one of them, and they don't play an outdoor game until like January. Now that coincides with the fantasy playoffs, and that's something to be mindful of when you take Jared Goff and other Detroit Lions to a lesser degree. But in home game indoor games last year, Jared Goff was like he had a point total that would have been quarterback 5 if you extrapolate it over a full year, and that was like 12 home dome games, I want to say it was. So like he indoors, you know what you're gonna get out of Jared Goff. Like the ceiling isn't tremendously high, but especially in Superflex, you're not dying for that in your second quarterback spot. You'll take the quarterback 9 or quarterback 11 or whatever the hell finish and be done with it. You don't really need a guy who has 50-point upside or whatever it is on a given week. You just don't. So Superflex, like that would be the strategy that I suggest you employ. If you're feeling risky and you want to just dive in and deal with the upside and nothing else, first of all, I applaud you because fantasy football is about upside. Like I think taking Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels, and then insert a random third guy here. I don't know who would be the guy. Maybe Rodgers, Stafford, like maybe somebody boring as your third guy. I applaud that. Like I think Jaden Daniels is an extreme value this year because I mean I think part of the reason he's not going necessarily like he's at last check he was quarterback 12 in ADP right now. I think part of the reason it's not a little bit higher, not too much higher, but a little bit higher is nobody trusts the Commanders. And I mean, who's to blame them? We've seen what the Commanders are about, right? But Jaden is probably one of the league's most gifted runners at the position. Obviously, we haven't seen him play yet. We'll see how that translates to NFL games. Cliff, we can say whatever we want about Cliff. We can say whatever we want about how good a head coach he was or not. His play calling, whatever it is, he gets production out of his guys, bro. And they're gonna run a shit ton of plays. Like that's the key part here. They're gonna run a shit ton of plays. Jaden Daniels has a lot of ability. The Commanders have some guys who they have some playmakers and potential playmakers at receiver and tight end. So it's a decent situation for a rookie quarterback to walk into from a purely projection and production standpoint. So like I would, if you wanted to take Richardson and Daniels and then, you know, throw in a random third, maybe boring pocket guy or whatever it is, or a high floor guy, however you want to frame that, I would strongly suggest it. Now, as far as I've spent 7 minutes talking about Superflex leagues. I think that's enough time. As far as one quarterback leagues, which is what I'm assuming most people play in, I would strongly suggest, unless you're in a 10-team league where everybody's going to have more talent by default, and you can go ahead and pay the premium for just elite talent regardless of position. It makes more sense to do that in a shallower league. Unless you're in a 10-team league, I would advise against spending the high-ass pick that you would have to take one of the elite quarterbacks. By one of the elites, you know who I'm talking about. 15 in KC, 17 in Buffalo, 1 in Philadelphia, and 8 in Baltimore. Those guys. I would strongly suggest against taking those fellas. So, I mean, what I'm saying is a mid-round value or somebody like Anthony Richardson is probably my favorite quarterback to draft in general this year because I think he has massive upside. Like last year, he averaged like 30 fantasy points per 60 minutes. If I read the stat that I read correctly a month ago. Obviously, he only played 3 games, and I think that's the reason his price is like semi-depressed. It's not because we didn't see the full thing. We only got a blip, but his upside is massive. If you believe Shane Steichen and the coaching staff, they're not going to neuter him. They're not going to try and get him to not run. I mean, that would not make sense. They took him in the top 4 because he's that big. He arguably is the most athletic quarterback in league history. Look it up. So everything points to Anthony Richardson having a really good season if he could stay on the field. I will say, if you're going to take Anthony Richardson or to a lesser degree Jaden Daniels, I would strongly suggest pairing them with Jared Goff or pairing them with whoever your favorite low upside, high floor guy is. I'd strongly suggest pairing them because obviously Anthony Richardson, we just watched it happen. We just watched it manifest itself last year, is an injury risk partially due to play style. So I strongly suggest you pair them. But, I mean, the thing is, man, listen, taking the guy who runs is just smart business. Again, you don't have to. You could be successful taking like Tua. But Tua threw for 1 million yards last year. He was like quarterback 13 because he don't run. To put it even simpler than that, Tim Tebow's year, 2012, 2011. I don't know, 2011 it might have been. I think it was 2011. 2011, where he could barely complete a forward pass. Tim Tebow was quarterback 9 because he ran a ton. Daniel Jones 2 years ago. We've seen the camp highlights. We've seen the NFL film on Daniel Jones. We know he ain't good. We know he ain't it. He finished quarterback 8, I think it was 2 years ago, because he ran for like 800 yards, or whatever it is. It's simple mathematics, bro. 10 rushing yards is a point, 20 passing yards is a point. And then in some leagues, it's 6 for a rushing touchdown, 4 for a passing touchdown. If you get a quarterback who can give you points on the ground, that gives you an advantage. It's simple mathematics. And I ain't no math major, but I know simple shit like that. So like I would strongly suggest aiming for guys who run. But that's the easy part about this. Now, you could take that advice and run with it. Like, I'm not going to tell you not to. But I do think there's a market for the pocket guys, because I do think some of them are slightly undervalued. And I will say this. CJ Stroud, very good rookie year. Amazing. One of the best rookie seasons of all time for a quarterback. I'm not here to argue any of that. They did get Stephon Diggs in there. Sure. I do think there's no way paying a 4th-round pick for CJ Stroud makes a lot of sense. When there are guys who have higher upside who are going a round or 2 later. I think Dak Prescott straight up is a better fantasy option than CJ Stroud this year. He's going 30 picks later. I don't really understand. Well, I understand it. I understand it on both ends. Like, people are excited about CJ Stroud. They added reinforcements, and people just don't like Dak. People don't like the Cowboys. Call a spade a spade. The thing with Dak is their defense didn't really improve much. We expect, by we I mean me, I expect them to play in a whole lot of shootouts this year. The second half of last year, the Cowboys finally shifted into a pass-heavy attack because they realized their running backs stink. Took long enough, and it took long enough for them to spam CeeDee Lamb with targets, but that's what happens when Homer Simpson is your head coach, but I digress. They're going to play in a lot of shootouts. Dak was like quarterback 3 the last like 10 games of last year. Their running backs stink. I mean, Dowdle might be okay. All right, the Zeke stinks. Dowdle might be okay. I don't expect them to sit there and be like, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna run the ball, 47% of the time, whatever a reasonable split would be amongst the more balanced teams, quote unquote. I expect them to be at or near the top of the leaderboard in pass rate. They have one of the best receivers in football. Jake Ferguson is also pretty good. Brandon Cooks is solid. Like, you don't love him as your number 2 wide receiver at this point, but he's solid. That going around 6-7 to me is as layup can get. Just in one quarterback leagues, obviously. Just take him. Hell, in Superflex leagues, take him. Just take him. It's easy. Just take him. He's gonna throw for a shit ton of yards because Dallas can't fucking run the ball, and their defense is it's alright. So Dak is a good value. I think Brock Purdy is a good value for a lot of obvious reasons. I don't feel like I need to go into them. Like, he's extremely productive. They're bringing back the same guys. Hopefully they stay healthy this go around. But when they're all healthy, I want to say he's like last year he would have been like quarterback 7 over that time, over that sample, that number. If you extrapolate the average number, the average points per game. And the thing with Brock Purdy, in general, there are guys in fantasy, and like when we get to the running back portion of this, and we talk about Isaiah Pacheco, this will come up. There are guys in fantasy who I fully believe their value is depressed because of where they were drafted and how they were drafted. And just people can't come around to, he just might be that guy. And I think Brock Purdy is one of them. It's not a blatant case because he plays quarterback. And I mean, quarterback, we all understand what the value is of quarterbacks in a one quarterback league. You can get a good guy or a borderline quarterback 1 or back end quarterback 1 really late. So it's not some egregious case. But I do think Brock Purdy, people would be way more excited about Brock Purdy if he was drafted, number 1 overall, top 5, top 10, whatever it is. And people tend to just look at Brock Purdy and they think his watch is fake. That's what they think. So I disagree with them personally. And I think a lot of it on both ends is kind of ridiculous. Like, I think Brock Purdy is better than the people who think he stinks think he is. And I think Brock Purdy is probably a little bit worse than people who think he's great is. But he did a lot last year with shaky offensive line play. And I think he unlocked the level in Shanahan's offense that the previous guys could not. So ultimately, Brock is good. I think C.J. Stroud's like the only quarterback. Well, besides the obvious, like I'm not taking any of the top 4 guys in one quarterback leagues in either. But I think of the I guess C.J. Stroud's technically close enough to that, but I want to make it clear I would avoid him. If you don't want to, feel free. There's a world where C.J. Stroud blows up and it makes me look stupid. Because, and I mean, the thing is that the mathematics with regard to their wide receiver ADPs and C.J. Stroud's ADP is funny. Because, flat out, one of them is wrong. If them wide receivers, if their ADP is correct, and like they all hit value or close to value, then C.J. Stroud's going way too late. And if C.J. Stroud hits, then wide receivers probably going too late. So like, it's one of those, like, both of those things can't really coexist. And if C.J. Stroud stinks, well, not stinks. If he takes a step back, all of those ADPs are going to look, well, let me not say all of them. Most of those ADPs are going to look bad in the end. So I would avoid C.J. Stroud. I would actively target Anthony Richardson, Dak Prescott, Jaden Daniels, even Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow's a good value too. He's going like 2 rounds after C.J. Stroud. I don't really understand why. Yes, the injuries, blah, blah, blah. I'll just lead off. Well, not lead off. This is 17 minutes in. I'll just say this as far as injuries. I am relatively injury agnostic. I can only speak for myself. It's football. We've watched guys. I watched Saquon Barkley 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, whatever it was, get injured because somebody stepped backwards during the middle of a play on his ankle, and he missed like 2 games. Look, guys are gonna get hurt, man. Like, I'm not really in the business of trying to forecast when guys get hurt. So like, I'm not here to say this guy's injury risk, this guy's that, and like dock people for it. I don't really care that much, personally. So Joe Burrow's injury, yes, I understand him having a fucking right wrist injury is alarming. I understand that. And I'm not here to minimize it. I am just here to say that. Me personally, I do not care. Understood if you do. But if you don't, and you're similar to me or lean towards my philosophy injury-wise, I think Joe Burrow is a screaming value. And if he gets hurt, he gets hurt, bro. Like, maybe in Superflex you want to look in a different direction. I think that's perfectly fair. I think in Superflex, one can afford to reasonably be more risk averse. So in one quarterback leagues, you take Joe Burrow. If you want to take Jared Goff, do it. You want to take Matthew Stafford, do it. You want to take that guy to back up Joe Burrow, do it. Because if Joe Burrow stays healthy all year, he's at worst like a top 6 or 7 quarterback. And then he has upside to finish like top 4, especially if Cincinnati decides to air the fucking ball out this year. Ultimately, quarterback is, for most of us, most of our leagues, a onesie position. I don't think you should spend too much time worrying about it. And this show is going on 20 minutes long, and I'm about to end this. It's probably going to be shorter than the running back, wide receiver, and to a lesser degree, tight end positions, because those are all harder needles to thread. But ultimately, hey man, take the guy who runs. Don't be afraid to take chances. And I think value-wise, you'd be best served to avoid the top 4 guys, because I think they're going too high. I think the goal is to find the guy who can be top 4 instead of finding the guy who's getting drafted in the top 4. That's where Anthony Richardson comes in. Jaden Daniels comes in. I think those guys are the ones you should be targeting. Hell, Dak Prescott too, because he's boring, but he's underdrafted in my opinion. So I hope that helped. I'll be back for running back and wide receiver, tight end previews, and wherever else the wind blows. And if you guys have any suggestions on what to talk about, what you want to hear, just let me know. All right, take it easy.